This tutorial is for both the PC and Shack versions of Pavlov. Please watch the full video and read the pinned comment before giving this a go yourself. If you are brand new to making custom guns, it is important that you watch my previous two videos on setting up content mods and rigging custom guns, before following this tutorial. I also suggest reading through their custom gun guides on mod.io. The UGC and mod initializer I use in this video will be the ones from my content mods tutorial. I will also be using the mesh from my rigging tutorial. I've imported my gun meshes to a folder in my UGC called Mesh. How you choose to organize your own project is down to you. Your gun mesh must be skeletal and have a physics asset. You must also make sure you have a mesh for both a full and empty magazine, as well as a bullet and a shell. All four of these must be static. Open your physics asset. By default, Unreal Engine has the primitives and bone tree hidden, so enable those in the top left. Right-click on the root bone and hover over Add Shape. Then select Add Box. Delete the capsule that was already there, then adjust the box to roughly encompass the length of your gun. Add a few more boxes and adjust them to cover the other parts of your gun that were not encompassed by the first box. On each of the added boxes, make sure Simulation Generates Hit Events is set to True for the primitives in the Details panel. This is to make sure the weapon plays sounds when dropped and colliding with geometry. If you are uploading your guns for Pavlov Shack, you will need to set some specific settings inside the textures, otherwise they may appear glossy or fully white in-game. In your color map, set the texture group to Weapon, and in your normal map, set the texture group to Weapon Normal Map. Any other texture maps should be fine. I should also mention, the mesh I'm using for this tutorial doesn't actually have any textures. Open up your mesh's skeleton. Right-click on your root bone and select Add Socket. You will need to add the following 5 sockets to your root bone. You can rename sockets in the top right or by double-clicking them. Right-click on the charging handle bone and add the following 2 sockets. All 7 of these sockets must be spelt exactly the same way I have here. I will include these in the pinned comment if you'd like to copy and paste them. Right-click on the magazine socket and hover over Add Preview Asset, then search for your custom gun's magazine mesh. Move this socket to have the magazine mesh fitting in your gun as it should. Add the same preview mesh to your mag insert socket, then copy and paste the location and translation of your magazine socket so this socket is aligned with the magazine socket. The magazine socket is the final position of your magazine when inserted to the gun, and the mag insert socket is the start point for the sliding animation. So adjust the mag insert socket to where the insert animation should start. Move the muzzle socket to the tip of the barrel and make sure X is facing forwards. Try to align it with the center of the barrel as closely as possible. Now do the same for the suppressor socket. Although with this one, move it back into the barrel a bit. You can give this a preview mesh for a suppressor if you want to get it in the right location. Next, move the shell ejection socket to the ejection port area. This is where the shell blueprint will spawn when the gun is shot. The rotation of this socket matters. It needs to be X-facing and angled slightly up. Now, move the chamber socket to line up with the bolt face. It is important that you add a preview mesh to this one so you can get it aligned properly. Finally, move the charging handle socket to the center of the charging handle. Right-click on the gun's mesh, hover over Create, and select Anim Blueprint. Name this file whatever you want. Click on Class Settings, then under Details, look for Parent Class, and set it to VR Gun Anim Instance. Open the Anim graph. Right-click somewhere in the open, and search for Local Space Ref, then add the node. Right-click again, and find Modify Bone. Connect the white T-pose icon from the local space ref node to the blue T-pose icon on the Modify Bone node. The local to component node will automatically be generated. Click on the Modify Bone node, then set Bone to Modify to the charging handle bone under the Details panel. Set the translation mode to Replace Existing, and the translation space to Bone Space. Do this for any other Modify Bone node's translation or rotation. Right-click on the translation pin on the Modify Bone node and select Split Struct Pin. Right-click in the open and search for Slide Time. Slide time goes from 0 to 1, so in order to move the charging handle with that, we need to multiply it. Right-click on the open area and search for Multiply. Then connect the Slide Time node to the top pin. Depending on how the gun was rigged, X, Y, or Z could be used. For this example, Y was the correct direction. Multiplying it by 7 works for this gun, but yours might be different. If you compile and save the Anim BP, you can click on the Slide Time node, and over on the right, change its values in the Details panel. The timeline for an animation is 0 to 1, with 0 being the start and 1 being the end. Anything outside this range will not be visible in-game. The preview mesh in the top left should update as the slide time changes. Use this for getting the right value for multiplying the slide time by. Make sure to set the slide time back to 0 when you are done previewing it. Do all of this again for the trigger bone and the fire mode bone. The mesh I'm using does not have a fire selection bone, so I won't be including animations for one. And for the trigger, you want to use the trigger ratio variable instead of slide time. Compile and save the Anim BP. Go to Plugins, Custom Map Tools Content, Pav Examples, Guns, then locate the folder of a gun that functions similar to your own. For your first gun, I highly suggest something simple that functions like an assault rifle. For this tutorial, I will be using the AK example blueprints. Duplicate gun underscore AK-47 underscore example and name it whatever you want. For convenience, I'd suggest naming it gun underscore your gun's name. Do the same for the magazine, shell, and bullet blueprints. Select all 4 of these newly created blueprints and move them to a folder inside your UGC. It's important to note, if you are making a custom pistol, to duplicate one of the pistol examples that uses the handgun base. It is also important that under no circumstances should you duplicate either of the 2 gun bases. If you want a fresh custom gun that isn't based on one of the examples, you must create a child blueprint of either base, as that's what the example guns already are. Open your magazine blueprint, and open the full blueprint. Then under Components, open Mesh, then set it to your magazine's loaded mesh. Now go to Class Defaults, and set Empty Mesh to your empty mesh, and Normal Mesh to your loaded mesh. Set max bullets to the amount the magazine should have. Below that, set the bullet type your gun should use. If using MagSlide, change any variables needed. I'll be leaving MagSlide as default. If Allow Mag Slap is ticked, then you will be able to remove your magazine by slapping another magazine against it. Scroll down and set the rotation offset as well as the first person and third person sequences. If your mesh already aligns with the example you're using, then you likely won't need to change this value. You can either use an existing hand sequence from another weapon or make your own. I will not be covering custom hand sequences in this video. However, relevant guides will be linked in the pinned comment. Compile and save the magazine blueprint. If you change your magazine's third-person sequence or its offset, right-click your magazine, then hover over Scripted Asset Actions and select VR Item Update Avatar Anims. This automatically sets the avatar hand offset and avatar hand rotation offset variables in the magazine. Open the blueprint for your custom gun shell. Click on Mesh in Components and set the mesh to your custom shell's mesh. Open Class Defaults and set Mesh Live to your shell mesh. Most guns eject to the right, so make sure right vector impulse is ticked. If your gun ejects to the left, make sure it's not ticked. Compile and save. Open your bullet blueprint and go to Class Defaults. If you're creating a simple custom gun, then you don't need to add anything here. If you're more familiar with Unreal Engine, then this is where you can customize the bullet tracers or impact particles. Open your gun blueprint, select Mesh under Components, and set it to your gun's mesh. Sometimes you may need to compile and save, then close and reopen the blueprint for the mesh to update. On the right hand side under the mesh's details, look for Animation, and set the Anim class to the one you created earlier for your mesh. If your gun's mesh is flickering in and out of existence, then you've likely got something wrong with your physics asset. A quick way to fix this is to search for bounds and increase the number. Setting it to 10 normally fixes it. Do not edit the bounds if your mesh is not flickering. Select Reload Handle under Components and move it to the rough position of your charging handle. Unfortunately, the mod kit does not show previews for the hand positions on the charging handles by default, so you'll need to add these previews yourself. With reload handle selected, click the plus symbol and choose skeletal mesh, then set the mesh to sk_hand_nt, or any of the other example meshes. Rename this so you know it's the right hand. I'll be renaming it to charging hand right. Search for hidden and make sure hidden in game is ticked. Then search for collisions and make sure its collisions are set to no collisions. Copy and paste this mesh and rename it so you remember it's the left hand. Then set its Y scale to -1. Return the reload handle, then under details, open the drop-down box for VR handle. Scroll down, then open the drop-down boxes for sequence right hand and sequence left hand. This is where you'll set the hand poses for your charging handle, as well as their offsets. Copy the values from sequence right hand onto your preview mesh for your right hand. Then do the same for the left hand. Now that you have previews for the charging handle hand poses, you can adjust their offset and sequences how you want. Just copy the changes you've made to the preview over to the drop-down boxes under the reload handle component. If you want to hide one or both of these so your viewport is less cluttered, search for visible while selecting one of them and untick visible. If you notice your gun mesh does not align with your primary hand, you have two options. You can either use a custom hand sequence that aligns with your gun, or you can edit the mesh's location. Preferably, you should edit your mesh's location in 3D modeling software like Blender. However, you can do it directly with Unreal Engine if you prefer. Open your gun's mesh and search for translation. Edit any of these values slightly, then press Re-import base mesh at the top of the screen. If you get an error pop-up, that means the original file can't be found. To fix this, you can either export the original model from whatever software you used, and select that as the file to overwrite the existing one, or export your gun's mesh from Unreal and select the exported file. Next, click on VR Magazine slot, then move and scale it to where the magazine is inserted. If you're using MagSlide, the VR Magazine slot box needs to be slightly inside the gun, otherwise you may experience issues with the magazine automatically reinserting itself when you try to remove it. Click on two-hand grip, then move and scale it to where your offhand will grab. If the offhand mesh isn't in the right position yet, you can ignore it for now, as we'll be coming back to that later. Go to Class Defaults in your gun BP, and search for Mag, then set this to your custom gun's magazine. Next, search for Shell, and set your custom gun's shell. Then search for Bullet, and set your custom gun's bullet. Set Chamber Mesh Live to the mesh for your gun's bullet, and chamber mesh shell to the mesh for your gun's shell. Most guns just use VR gun state, however certain types of guns may need specific gun states. If you're just modifying a copied example BP, then you likely won't need to edit this. I will not be covering gun states any further in this video. Search for Inventory in Class Defaults. Select the Inventory Slots drop-down box to choose where in the inventory the gun can be holstered. You can edit Inventory Offset to adjust the scale and rotation of the item when it's in the inventory. To edit the offset for an item when in a specific inventory slot, add an element to Custom Inventory Offset. On screen is an image showing the ID for each inventory slot. Search for attachments in Class Defaults. Here you have the option for 5 different types of attachment: Picatinny, Grip, Suppressor, Accessory, and Canted. Picatinny is where you will put any scopes or sights, and Accessory is for bayonets and flashlights. The other 3 are self-explanatory. Each attachment slot can only have one attachment equipped at a time. As far as I'm aware, it is not possible to add additional slots. However, there's likely some way of adding more slots with code. The highlighted text field is where you enter the name of the socket used for that attachment. These must match their respective sockets on your gun mesh's skeleton. The compatibility drop-down boxes are where you decide which flags that attachment slot will use. Compatibility flags range from 1 to 32. Only attachments that have the same flag will be compatible with a slot. They also have to be the correct type of attachment. For example, you cannot equip a bayonet to a Picatinny socket, even if the bayonet and Picatinny are set to use the same compatibility flags. A full list for all the compatibility flags or vanilla attachments will be in the pinned comment. Under the default attachments drop-down box, you can select which attachment will already be on the gun when it's spawned in, assuming it's spawned in with default attachments. Unfortunately, you will need to fake reference any vanilla attachment you want to have as a default attachment. I will not be covering fake referencing in this video. If you've made custom attachments, setting them as a default attachment is easy, as you'll already be able to reference them in the mod kit. I will not be covering custom attachments in this video. Attachment mode range is the angle in which the gun has to be held in order for attachment mode to be activated, and attachment mode hold time is how many seconds the gun has to be held at that angle. If you search for sound under class defaults, you will find the majority of different sound effects you can customize. Some of the more complicated example guns may have some sound effects in the event graph rather than in the class defaults. For the most part, you can ignore everything in the highlighted area. However, you have the option to customize them if you wish. The 3 audio cues highlighted are the different layers for the shooting sounds. First person is the sound that plays client side at the tip of the barrel. First person 2D is a sound that plays client side without any attenuation or replication, so it doesn't matter where it plays relative to the player. The reason this cue is separate to the normal first person cue is for sound layering. Third person is a sound that plays server side which other players can hear. The 3 highlighted sounds are alternative shooting sounds for when a suppressor is equipped. They follow the same concept. If your gun can't have a suppressor, you can leave this empty. The rest of the sound effects should be self-explanatory with what they do. Press the browsing symbol to go to the location of the cue, then go back one. All of the vanilla sound cues for weapons are in the new audio folder. These are only fake references, so you won't be able to hear them in Unreal Engine. If you want to hear them, you'll need to use the respective weapons in game. For the sake of this tutorial, I'll be leaving all the sound cues as default. If you want to use custom sound effects with your gun, I'd suggest duplicating and modifying the example sound cues for the M4 to make sure you have the right attenuation. Search for recoil in class defaults. You will see there are many different settings for recoil, rather than just one variable. You can feel free to spend ages tweaking all these settings until they feel right. Or you could do what most modders do, and steal the recoil settings from another example gun. For example, if I wanted my gun to have the same recoil as an M4, I would open the M4 example and search for recoil in class defaults. Then individually copy and paste these values over to my custom gun. In the newest mod kit, there is a mistake with the recoil in custom guns. Currently custom guns don't have horizontal recoil. This is because recoil curve is using the wrong vector. Click the search icon on the recoil curve. Scroll up until you find the MISC folder. Duplicate any of these vectors and name the duplicate recoil curve. It must be spelt exactly like this or your game may crash. Return to your gun BP, then change its recoil curve to the one you just created. If you're watching this in the future and custom guns are already using the correct recoil curve, then you can ignore this part. Open up any level and search for recoil in the Place Actors window. Drag and drop Recoil Simulator into your level. Under Details, set the gun class to your custom gun, then tick Enable Simulation. You can click Fire Weapon to simulate firing. By default, it will only fire once per click. If you tick Full Auto, you can edit how many rounds are fired per click. This also only shows the one-handed recoil by default. If you want to show the recoil for when the gun is held with both hands, then you can tick Two-Hand Gripped. Search for Fire Mode in class defaults. Click on the drop-down box to change the default fire mode. You have 4 options to choose from: Semi, Automatic, Manual, and Burst. Semi is just semi-auto, and Automatic is full auto. Manual means you need to cock the gun after every shot. Burst means the gun will fire 3 bullets back to back after pulling the trigger once. This is hard-coded, so you can't easily edit how many bullets are fired in a burst. Below that drop-down box, you are able to edit which fire modes are available to your gun. Search for Sequence in class defaults. Sequence is the hand pose for the primary hand, and Avatar Sequence is the third-person hand pose for your primary hand. Magnetic Grip Sequence is the first-person hand pose for your offhand, and Avatar Magnetic Grip Sequence is the third-person hand pose for your offhand. You can also change the offhand sequences if the gun doesn't have a magazine inserted. Leave those blank if it's not any different. Same as earlier with the magazine, if you edit the third-person sequences, you have to run the VR item update avatar anims script. I will be covering custom hand poses in a separate video. Eject shell is whether or not the shell is ejected after each shot. Show chambered mesh is whether or not the bullet mesh is shown in the chamber. Bolt lock till ammo will prevent the charging handle from unlocking unless the gun has a magazine with bullets inserted. Bolt lock manual means if you hold back the charging handle for a few seconds, it'll lock open. Chamber on magazine releases the bolt when a new magazine is inserted. Setting the gun to open bolt will cause the round to be chambered when you pull the charging handle back, and prevent you from manually pushing it forwards. I'd advise against making something open bolt as your first gun, as there's a fair bit of setup that needs to be done. If lock bolt is enabled, the last round fired will lock the bolt back. Auto unchamber will unchamber the gun on magazine release. If two-hand support only is enabled, your offhand will not affect the gun's rotation. This will make your gun handle more like a pistol. Disabling two-hand reload will prevent the gun's magazine from being removed manually, forcing the player to eject it using the mag release button. This is typically only used for pistols. Supports mag release, allows the magazine to be dropped by pressing the magazine button. Muzzle zero bias is incredibly important for making sure your iron sights or scope align with the projectile. I'll be covering this in a separate video. Grip offset var lets you edit the position of the offhand in Unreal. To translate those changes to Ingame, make sure to copy those changes to the grip offset. Bullet spray is how many projectiles are spawned when you shoot the gun. If this number is lower than 1, then only one projectile will be spawned. Each projectile does the same amount of damage which you set in the mod initializer. For this tutorial, I'll be using the mod initializer created by Darkhat that I showed in my guide for content mods. Click on the Add to List component and scroll down to Add to List. Click Add Element under Guns and open the drop-down box. Set the ID to whatever you want your gun's ID to be. There shouldn't be any issues with capital letters and underscores. However, I've experienced issues with guns not showing up in the buy wheel in the past. So personally, I keep IDs as one word, all lowercase, and avoid any special characters. I'd also advise double checking your ID does not conflict with the ID of another modder's custom item. Most modders list all their weapon IDs in the mod.io page for their mod. Set gun class to your custom gun blueprint. Open the buy menu drop-down box. You can edit which section of the buy menu it's under, or if it's not purchasable at all. Below that, you can edit which teams can purchase the weapon, as well as the price. Buy menu image is the gun icon that will show in the buy wheel and on the kill feed. I will not be covering custom icons in this video. If you don't have an icon, the buy wheel will just display your gun's ID, and the kill feed will just be blank when you kill someone with that gun. Set loot mesh to your custom gun's mesh. This is the mesh that will show in push loadout lockers and when you spawn your gun in the level with an item spawner. Magazine count is how many full magazines worth of ammo the player will get if they spawn with the weapon in game modes with limited ammo, such as push. The various damage settings should be fairly self-explanatory. If you don't feel like worrying about balancing, you can do what most modders do, and steal the damage values from a similar vanilla gun. In the pinned comment will be a link to a spreadsheet with the damage values for every vanilla Pavlov gun. There are several different ways to test your custom gun in game. The most straightforward will be if you have a server or admin privileges on a server. Run the mod your gun is in on that server, and spawn the gun by its ID using Archon commands. If you don't have your own server, this isn't really an option. So what most modders do is have a test map with the mod their custom gun is in as a dependency, then either buy their gun on the buy wheel or spawn it in an item spawner. An item spawner blueprint can be found in Custom Map Tools content, Pav examples, BP_test item spawner. I'm not entirely sure why, but this blueprint only seems to work for me when my map's using a custom global info. This concludes my tutorial on creating custom guns. If you found it helpful, a subscription would be appreciated.